sharks and specters. But he recalled the shooting well enough. Rowdy followed such things, being a lawman, and he'd mentioned the incident in passing in one of his letters. Mail from home, Stone Creek being the only place Gideon ever thought of in that particular context, and then not with any great degree of sentimentality, was infrequent. And since he moved around a lot in his profession, it generally took some time to catch up to him. "You want another whiskey there, Horace?" the barkeep asked the old man. He sounded nervous, like he didn't want to offer, but feared dire consequences if he failed to make the gesture. Not that the leprechaun represented any threat to the bartender. Gideon would have bet the shriveled-up little old man wouldn't have weighed in at more than 100 pounds if he'd been sopping wet and wearing granite shit-kickers. And from the looks and smell of Horace, he'd gone past enough a long time ago. But he grunted without looking up and shoved his glass out to be filled again. The barkeep poured the whiskey, standing back farther than seemed sensible and sweating harder. Gideon took all this in, not because he was interested, but because it was what he did. Working for the Pinkerton Agency after college and then for Wells Fargo, he'd learned to pay attention to everything going on around him, even in the most ordinary circumstances. Especially then. He'd have bet that barkeep hadn't washed his hands in weeks, let alone taken a bath. Gideon frowned and studied his beer mug more closely, but except for a few smudges and a thumbprint or two, it looked passably clean. He wasn't back east anymore, he reminded himself, with another slight contortion of his face that might have been accepted as a smile in some quarters. Best get over being so fastidious. He felt the slight shift in the air, even before the doors to the street swung open, a sort of quiver, similar to the throb of the piano strings, but soundless. Setting his beer mug down, he watched in the mirror as two men came in from the street, single file, both of them the size of grizzly bears raised up on their hind feet. No, Gideon corrected himself silently. These yahoos would dwarf the average grizzly. Despite the heat, he'd left his own suit coat at the train station with his bags. They wore the long canvas coats common to gunslingers, as well as ordinary ranchers, and both of them carried sidearms, the butts of long-barreled pistols jutting out of the waistbands of their dark woolen pants. Their gazes tracked and found the old man, sliced over to Gideon, sharp as honed knives, then swung back and bored into their target again. "Monty," one of them ground out, presumably greeting the barkeep. They'd paused just inside the doors, which were still swinging on their rusted hinges. Monty gulped audibly, set down the bottle he'd poured the old coot's drink out of, and took a couple of steps backward. Came up hard against the shelf behind him, with its rows of bottles and glasses. The front of his shirt, damp before, was nearly saturated now, he was perspiring so heavily. "I only give old Horace more whiskey 'cause he asked me to," Monty spouted, as if he'd been challenged on the matter, working up a grimace of a smile that wouldn't stay put on his face. Entertained, Gideon suppressed a smile, along with the sigh that came along behind it. When he got to Stone Creek and started his new job, the one he'd lied to Rowdy and Wyatt about in his last letter, such amusements as this one would be few and far between. He was in the Golden Horseshoe Saloon, he reminded himself, to have a beer, not watch a melodrama, or to participate in one. Still, the fine hairs were standing up on the nape of his neck, and the sixth sense he'd developed, working as a detective, was in fine form.